It was 1944. London was on fire, but not from bombs you could hear coming. No sirens, no warning, no sound. 1 second a building was standing, the next second dust, rubble, silence. People were dying from something invisible, something unstoppable. Churchill knew exactly what it was, but he refused to tell the public for weeks because the truth was too terrifying to say out loud. Nazi Germany had just launched a weapon so advanced, so deadly, that nothing in the entire Allied military could stop it. Not fighter jets, not anti-aircraft guns, nothing. And the terrifying part, if Hitler had received this weapon just 18 months earlier, World War II would have had a completely different ending. And you and I would be living in a very different world right now. To understand how close the world came to losing, you have to go back to a cold Baltic coastline in 1937. A 25-year-old German engineer named Wernher von Braun was standing inside a secret research facility on a remote island called Peenemünde. Most Germans had never heard of this place. Most senior Nazi officials didn't even know it existed, and that was exactly the point. Inside this facility, hundreds of Germany's finest engineers and physicists were working on something that had never been attempted in human history. A rocket that could travel faster than sound, fly to the edge of space, and deliver a massive warhead to a target hundreds of miles away. In 1937, the fastest fighter planes on Earth flew at around 400 miles per hour. Von Braun's team was building something that would travel at 3,500 miles per hour. The gap between what existed and what they were building was not small. It was almost science fiction. But von Braun himself was not interested in war. He never had been. As a young boy in Germany, he read science fiction obsessively. He ran rocket experiments in open fields. He wrote letters to scientists asking how a human being could one day leave the Earth and reach other planets. He was not a soldier. He was a dreamer. But Nazi Germany in the 1930s was not a place where dreamers got to choose how their genius was directed. The SS approached him with a deal that was not really a deal at all. Build us a weapon and we will give you unlimited funding, a world-class team, and the facilities to make your rocket dream real. Von Braun signed the paperwork. He joined the Nazi Party. He later spent the rest of his life insisting he had no real choice. History has argued about that claim ever since. The early years at Peenemünde were a disaster. Rocket after rocket exploded on the launch pad. Others veered wildly off course seconds after liftoff. Others broke apart in mid-air. The team watched years of work turn into fire and black smoke over and over again. Hitler himself visited the program in 1939, looked at what he saw and walked away dismissive. He wanted tanks. He wanted artillery. He didn't understand what these engineers were actually building. His skepticism nearly shut the entire program down and came close to changing history entirely, but for the wrong side. Then, on October 3rd, 1942, everything changed. On a grey autumn morning on the Baltic coast, a rocket designated the A4 rose from its launch pad in a column of white smoke and fire. It climbed. It accelerated past the speed of sound. It kept climbing, past 50 kilometers, past 80 kilometers, past the boundary where Earth's atmosphere ends and space begins. It traveled 190 kilometers downrange and struck its target with precision that stunned every scientist watching. The head of the program turned to von Braun with tears running down his face and said, "Today the spaceship is born, but this was not a spaceship. It was a weapon, and within months it would be renamed. The world would come to know it as the V2. When Hitler finally watched the full test footage in 1943, something shifted in him dramatically. He had previously dismissed rockets as a fantasy. Now he called the V2 a miracle weapon and demanded mass production immediately. He wanted thousands of them. He wanted to reduce London to dust. He wanted to destroy the will of the British people so completely that Churchill would have no choice but to sue for peace, and had everything gone according to his timeline, he might have had a genuine chance. Because the truth about the V2 was deeply, fundamentally terrifying. There was no defense against it, none. A missile traveling at over a mile per second cannot be tracked by radar in time to intercept. It cannot be shot down by anti-aircraft guns. Fighter pilots cannot chase something that moves 4 times faster than their planes. The explosion arrives before the sound does. You never hear it coming. By the time your ears register anything, the building next to you is already gone. What saved London, and possibly the entire Allied war effort, was one night in August 1943. On the 17th, nearly 600 RAF bombers flew through walls of German anti-aircraft fire and bombed Peenemünde almost into rubble. The British had discovered the facility through a combination of spy networks, aerial reconnaissance photographs, and a crucial tip from a Polish resistance operative who had personally photographed the wreckage of a crashed test rocket in the woods and smuggled the film out of occupied territory at enormous personal risk. The bombing raid killed hundreds of workers and key engineers and set the entire V2 program back by an estimated 6 to 8 months. Those 6 to 8 months would turn out to be the difference between a Nazi victory and a Nazi defeat. Forced underground, the Germans made a decision that crossed a line that haunts the legacy of this weapon to this day. They moved V2 production inside a mountain in central Germany into a place called Mittelwerk, carved out of solid rock in the Harz mountain range, and the labor that built those rockets came from the nearby Dora concentration camp. Tens of thousands of prisoners, Jewish men, Soviet prisoners of war, political prisoners from across occupied Europe, were forced to work in those tunnels without sunlight, without adequate food, in constant noise, surrounded by toxic fumes, under the watch of guards who used violence casually and without consequence. Historians who have studied this chapter carefully estimate that more human beings died constructing the V2 rocket than were ever killed by it as a weapon. That is the number that should stop you cold for a moment. The first operational V2 was launched on September 8, 1944. It hit London's Chiswick district without any warning whatsoever. 3 people died, 17 were injured. Churchill's government immediately classified all information about the attack and told the public a gas main had exploded. They kept the cover story going for weeks because the psychological implications of telling the British public that an unstoppable weapon was now raining down on them without warning were too dangerous to manage. Over the months that followed, more than 3,000 V2 rockets were launched at Allied targets, primarily London and the critical port city of Antwerp in Belgium. They killed approximately 9,000 people. They destroyed tens of thousands of buildings. But more than the physical damage, they created a specific kind of fear that was different from anything the war had produced before, the fear of randomness. A V1 buzz bomb made a distinctive engine sound, and people learned to run when it went silent overhead. The V2 gave you nothing. No sound, no warning, no logic. It simply arrived and killed whoever happened to be standing in the wrong place. But here is the question that serious military historians keep returning to. What if the timeline had been different? Von Braun's team had the V2 ready for mass production in early 1943. Hitler's indifference delayed it. The RAF bombing raid delayed it further. By the time the weapon became operational in September 1944, the D-Day landings had already happened. Allied armies were already pushing through France. The Eastern Front was collapsing. The V2 was devastating, but it was no longer capable of changing the outcome of the war. Move that timeline back 18 months. Deploy the V2 against London and Allied coastal ports in early 1943, and the entire strategic situation for the D-Day invasion changes. The ports, the supply lines, the troop concentrations, the infrastructure that made the largest amphibious operation in history possible. All of it becomes a potential target for a weapon that cannot be stopped. Many historians believe D-Day would have been delayed, possibly by years. Many believe it might not have happened at all, and the V2 was not even the most extreme weapon the Germans were developing. The V3 was a supergun, so enormous it was constructed directly into a hillside in the Pas-de-Calais region of France. A series of smoothbore barrels, 130 meters long, designed to fire shells at London continuously, one every few minutes, indefinitely. Allied bombers destroyed it before it ever fired a shot in anger.